Всем добрый день.
Hello and welcome, Dr. Michael Laitman. Hello. We're continuing with our course, the post-corona era, and today we'd like to talk about the generation gap. Very interesting topic. I collected questions about this throughout the week. I learned many new things, and let's start with a short exposition. A generation is like the sum total of all people that live in a certain historic period. Psychologists say that it's within the boundaries of about 20 years, and it has to meet three criteria. They're in the same historic era, they have the same models of behavior, more or less, and share a collective kind of experience in life. We know that the generations are divided into baby boomers, X, Y, and Z. This is information that you can find on the internet. We're not going to get into this. The question to you, how would you divide the generations? According to what principles? Based on the laws of nature, of course. An interesting question. By the way, no one asked me this question. I would divide the generations according to their aspiration for the purpose of creation. We can observe our development, our life, of how it was throughout thousands of years and see the differences, but since I'm engaged in the wisdom of Kabbalah, I divide everything happening in our world into or according to man's aspiration for the purpose of creation. Therefore, for me, a very important era is starting with ancient Babylon, where the wisdom of Kabbalah was founded, established, under Abraham, who was back then their leader, who committed a spiritual revolution that called out to people to come together, unite, love another as yourself. By the way, that generation is called the generation of separation. It gave a push to the disperse of people all around the world. Afterwards, there is the generation of Egypt, the coming out of Egypt, acknowledgement of the ego as evil. Before that, there were the generations from Adam to Noah. It says so, generations. So if you're already talking about this kind of history, what were the sages, what did they base themselves on by naming the generations by these names? It's a completely different meaning of existence. We're talking about a group of people that existed in an awakening to reveal the meaning of life, to reveal what controls humanity, what is it headed toward, why was it created, formed, the reason for it. So, in general, we have to define what can we call a generation. A generation is that awakening that exists in a group of people in relation to the purpose of creation. Therefore, I divide all of these periods into generations, and they're very different from a generation that could live for 1,000 years, and there's a generation that changes in a few dozens of years or even less. From history, we see that the times hasten, that if in the past it was 1,000 years, now it's 20 years. Yeah, but what changes in people in 20 years? Little. They what? They change what they're in pursuit of, whether it's cars, smartphones, traveling, what changes? Nothing, actually. If we're talking about the attitude toward the meaning of life, then it's all practically not defined by the generation. They change qualitatively in relation to their question about the meaning of life. What are we living for? What do we exist for? And, just to call them X, Y, Z, it's all conditional. What differences are there between them? The toys they play with? Well, no, they say that those that, suppose, went through the war or some other historic events, this defines them, because we replaced one for the other. We replaced the purpose of creation and the way we aspired for these values of the purpose of creation in different times. We've replaced it with something very materialistic, petty. What's the conflict between generations, between fathers and sons? The essence of I also don't see a big conflict. If the fathers played with primitive computers, then the children play with more serious machines, meaning more advanced computers. But concretely, what qualitative difference is there between them? The difference in the approach to the meaning of life, to revealing the meaning of life, the meaning of our existence, this does not exist. The values. What values? Their values were horses and donkeys, and now it's cars and money in the bank. Well, they're the values of equality, freedom. I think that already went by and we replaced it for something else. Okay, we'll talk about this. Are there punishments for the sins of the previous generations, that sons will be punished for the actions of their fathers? Well, yes, we don't exist simply in and of ourselves like ordinary people think, that we can do whatever we feel like. What we don't understand is that we are within the boundaries of nature, in which all the possible laws exist in it, and we're gradually revealing this on the levels of the still, the vegetative, and the animate. But on the human level, we cannot reveal these qualities, these laws. We can only assume that they exist. Because if we're looking at the still vegetative and still nature, we look at it somehow from above down and can control it. And to look at other people, we can do it only on our level. We can't look at things from above down, and therefore we don't have like these two stories to look at the still nature from our degree, at the vegetative and at the animate. So on the human level, therefore we're constantly erring. We don't have what to compare with. We don't have these two levels from which you can look from the higher level to the lower one. Therefore, Kabbalah says that we have to rise to the next degree that is called faith above reason, meaning the second floor higher than the first one. And then from it, we will correctly see our earthly level and will be able to understand who we are on the first level and how we have to behave. Where does this concept come from of that the generations are becoming coarser? It's something that we see. We see that to the measure to which the more a generation develops, it develops in what? Its ego develops. The ego becomes cruder, shrewder, multifaceted, multi-layered, and therefore The ego is pulling us downwards, and we have to somehow balance it out by our aspiration upwards for something higher. But we do not understand this yet, but we have come to a time where we can start understanding how to act in order to balance our ego out and more or less to influence the way we live. Is it possible to say that different levels of the ego are the reason for the conflicts between generations? Yeah? Everyone's an egoist, but each in their own way. Psychologists say that the biggest rift is between millennials and their parents, meaning people that were born between the beginning of the 80s and the 90s. They call this conflict a digital divide, meaning those that already started working with the internet, and between them there's this great abyss. What do you think would happen in this period, maybe besides the digital divide? Well, we don't have any other way to examine this, but we know this on ourselves. Those that existed before the internet era, the way we existed. We went to work, we came back from work, we brought products, brought them home, made food, went to sleep, and the same the next day and the next day. Like with Charlie Chaplin's movies, like in his movies. And today it's all completely different. Today we live in computers, not between ourselves at all. Integrally, that is. Between all parts of the world, we don't even know who's writing us, who are we writing to. It's not important. We crossed a completely different level of relations. Were you today to cut the internet connection between people, then you could imagine the kind of chaos that would have roamed the planet. Suppose the sun would explode a bit in its activity, and, it would have shut everything down. All of our communications would have went out of order. What's interesting is that all the systems of governance, civil, not civil, would have stopped. All the equipment in hospitals, different ministries, banks, institutions, nothing would work. Meaning, were we to cut the communication between us that did not exist, suppose 50 years ago, then we would have stopped existing. We would have had no means of communication. And everything's based on it. Yeah, but internally, in this period from the 80s to the 90s, is there some kind of interchange? The interchange is that we came out into a completely different realm of connection. We feel ourselves as a different humanity. If previously we felt the connection between people, even if it's through mobiles or radio or whatever, today we feel the connection not between people, but between IDs, IPs. And it's a completely different feeling. So I don't care who's writing me as a person, but what is important for me is how do I perceive it, look at it. So, if in the past people didn't leave their village and were in contact with a few dozens or hundreds of people, then today, in a lifetime, a person meets thousands, tens of thousands of people. What is this tendency? It's the tendency towards a very simple process that we have to feel ourselves completely as one family, as one society, completely interconnected, unable to exist in any other way. So eventually this process of this complete interconnection and the relations between us, even though that it's egoistic, but it will bring us to the understanding that we have to find some different means of communication. So I'll be in touch with billions of people, I'll personally know them. There will be a worldwide communication, and it has to be good. Otherwise, we'll simply bury each other. Today we're starting to understand the lie about this system, how it's harming all of us. The reason for the conflicts, say psychologists, is the inequality between parents and children, fathers and sons. Could they have a relationship, fathers and sons, like between friends? Because Father's Day, like, say, what do you know, and vice versa. Can you be a friend with your child? Should you? Is it possible? Should you be equals, or no, it shouldn't be as equals. By that, you'll harm the child. You have to be his older buddy. Not buddy, but older buddy. Another center of conflict between the generations is the freedom, and the main conflict is that the values have changed. We can see that in for religious people, the changes are smaller over time, and the conflicts are smaller. But among the secular population, the change in values is much greater. Yeah, I agree. I relate differently to these two kinds of populations. I'm familiar with both, and therefore I very clearly agree with what you're saying. Are there some universal values that could bridge the gap, the rift between the generations? The value has to be higher than this, higher than religious society and secular society. The value should be in the complete adhesion with the integral nature. It represents the upper force, the upper value, quality, and therefore we need to investigate this nature and be connected with it. So, a question about this. You're saying that the new ethics, new values have to include in them the knowledge of the universal laws of nature and so on. Can you name at least one example about such a law and how to implement it? What are these laws? You're all the time talking about laws. If you can give an example of how it is implemented in the family life, for example. You mean what? You're saying that we have to follow some universal laws of nature. Yeah, it is the law of mutual supplementation, completion. In the family, it exists to some extent on a basic level, meaning the smallest, they are the most important in the family. And the more grown-up a person is, mature, stronger, the more he owes others. These are the kinds of laws that also have to be in society. There are conflicts between men and women for thousands of years, between fathers and sons, nations, countries. It's a fact. But what conclusion can we derive from these conflicts? What does nature want to show us? It's natural. Nature wishes to show us that we have to rise above these conflicts to a point where everyone will see themselves as one family. And in a family, like I just said, we supplement each other, complete each other. Everyone puts into the general piggy bank as much as he can. A small child, by his warmth and participation, an older one, with his bigger participation, mature participation. Why do we have to rise above this? If we look at nature, there you have these conflicts in the animate world and coercion and whatnot. Maybe these are natural things. Why are we suddenly starting to think maybe we should change all this, rise above it? In the animate world, it exists. It's a law. But we came out of the animate world, and we have risen to the degree of man. Meaning, even our ego is not like animals have. They have an instinctive ego given to them by nature that they can't change, that they can only use it to their maximum benefit. But not so for man. He is a social creature. He has to correct himself in order to be socially beneficial. And here you can't do anything. This is something that we have to be engaged in. Otherwise, we have no future. So when you're saying that we have to look at the laws of nature and learn from nature, you don't mean that we have to look at how it's all built instinctively in the animal kingdom. No, that could not be an example for us. But we're a part of nature. We're a part of nature, but only according to our animate body, not according to our ego. I don't think that we should mix these two levels in us. This is something that we have to scrutinize. Okay, we'll talk about this on our future shows. Do grandparents have a special function in the development of their grandchildren? And how does it differ from parents? Parents, they prepare their children for the material life. Grandparents, they give their grandchildren a more universal view, understanding, more spiritual kind of understanding, so we have to understand their significance. Today it's hard for older people to catch up with the younger people. Psychologists say that this is one of the reasons for the disregard of children for their parents, meaning if in the past parents pass something on, some understanding from generation to generation, today everything completely changed. You're talking from the point of view of complete egoism. That a child can, provide for himself, but he also needs some kind of mental, emotional, psychological support. And without grandparents, parents, he can't find it. But still, what can parents give their children nowadays? What kind of emotional support? When children have their own children, then the parents can give their children what the children feel that they really need. Okay, let's have a blitz. Short questions and answers. What generations can we mention as a turning point in human development? There are many such generations. Each generation determines something in humanity. Well, one generation from which some kind of development of mankind started. The spiritual development of mankind started with the building of the first temple. The matter isn't about the building itself, but about the period, that period in time. Then people seriously started connecting with each other, and in that connection to reveal the upper force, the Creator. So from that point on, it was about 1,000 years BC. This is when humanity started developing spiritually. Well, it started even earlier in ancient Babylon, but actually intensively from the times of the first temple. What changes a generation? Historic history, wars, cataclysms. inner program. In an interconnected global world, how does the conflict between generations influence or affect the entire system? Will this go and grow? It will go and grow to the measure to which the generations will solve the problems of the inner connections between them, and in their connection by it, they will influence the general picture of nature that will influence them in return. So the conflicts will grow. I hope that along with it, human reason, understanding, knowledge will grow, and by it compensating the contradictions between the generations. What does a younger generation need to receive? The younger generation has to receive from the older generation an attitude toward the purpose of creation, the meaning of life. That doesn't change. Everything else changes. It's all just the clothing, but the purpose of creation does not change. What can bridge the gap between fathers and sons? Also, this is the goal set before everyone that we have to go through and achieve a whole, complete, and eternal state. The conflict between parents and children, fathers and sons, exists for a long time. What is special about these times? I'd say that the current conflict is in that children have to rise to the level of a completely different new form of existence than their fathers existed in. In the relations between them, they have to discover the next level of their existence, something that their fathers did not have, that they subconsciously yearned for but didn't exactly know how to implement it. And today children have this ability. In the current society of consumption, that parents understand that if children correctly yearn for their meaning in life, revealing the next degree, then the parents will do it correctly. But in the eyes of their children, how can they become more important to parents? By supporting this concept. In a word, our generation, the post-coronavirus era generation, what is it? It is a generation that was given a special task, mission. Hopefully, it'll realize it. The universal principles that you write about in your books, should they be adapted for each and every generation, to each and every generation? Undoubtedly, I'm working on it. Who has to form the generation? The generation is formed by people that understand what is up ahead. They reveal, they unfold the different tasks that the generation has to deal with, how can they be realized, and try to somehow direct the generation toward the solution. Each generation is more fit for life. Do you agree with it? No. They have a potential to solve problems that nature introduces them with, but at the same time, they need a very strong guiding hand. What generation do you attribute yourself to? I am a part of, I'm in between generations, between the old generation and the new generation that has not yet realized itself. I help them, showing them the path. We're saying that collective experience determines the generation. What kind of collective experience can you recall from your life? Collective experience in my life gave nothing besides negative, a big negative warning sign. All the positive I got from my teacher. Well, in conclusion, what could you advise about conflicts, the conflicts between generations, the gap between generations, what can bridge the gap. I hope that the past generation will be wiser and smarter, will relate more wisely toward the newer generation. The newer generation will understand that they will have a very serious task in life that they have to solve, and they have to solve it independently. The previous generation will support, but will not be able to show the path for the new generation. We're in such a period in time where the younger generation has to acquire a new method, ideology, attitude toward life and the world. This is what I hope them. All the best. Thank you very much for your answers. Till next time, all the best.